The note was 4 lines long, written on the back of a grocery receipt, and Renee Carter carried it in her coat for 11 days before she understood what it meant. She had cleaned the house on Linden Court for almost 6 years, every Tuesday and Friday, and in all that time the old man who lived there had said maybe 40 words to her. Now he was gone. The house emptied out in a single weekend by a moving company she had never seen. And on the kitchen counter where he used to leave her pay there was this scrap of paper folded once, with her name on the outside in a shaky hand. She had no idea that the 4 lines on that receipt were worth more than every paycheck she had ever earned in her life combined. She only knew her knees hurt, her youngest had a fever, and the rent was due in 9 days. So she put the note in her pocket and kept scrubbing, because that was the kind of woman she was, and the world had not yet caught up to what that was worth. If you have ever done a thing faithfully for years and wondered whether anyone noticed, stay with this one, because somebody noticed Renee, and you are about to learn what it cost him to be sure. Renee was 38, and she had been cleaning other people's houses since she was 22. It started as a way to cover the gap after her husband left, when the baby was new and the bills were old, and it never stopped being that, a way to cover the gap. The gap just kept moving. First it was diapers and the light bill, then it was school shoes and a busted transmission. Now it was 3 children, a sick mother 2 states away, and an apartment on the east side of the city where the radiator knocked all night, and the landlord raised the rent every spring like it was a law of nature. She had 4 regular clients and picked up odd jobs where she could, and on a good week she cleared maybe $600, and a good week was rare. She kept a notebook in her purse with a rubber band around it, and in that notebook she tracked every dollar in and every dollar out in small, careful numbers, and most months the 2 columns came so close together that a single car repair could tip the whole thing into ruin. She knew the price of everything. She knew the gallon of milk was up 40 cents from spring, and that the off-brand cereals at the store on Crenshaw was $1 less than the same box. 4 blocks closer to home, and that walking the 4 blocks saved the $1, but cost her 20 minutes she did not have. People who have never been poor think poverty is loud. It is not. It is quiet arithmetic, done over and over, late at night, at a kitchen table, by a tired woman who does not want to wake her children with the sound of her worrying. The house on Linden Court was the best of her jobs, and the strangest. It belonged to a man named Walter, and Walter was old, somewhere past 80, thin as a coat hanger, with white hair he never combed and eyes that watched everything and gave nothing away. He lived alone in a house far too big for him. 2 stories of dark wood and heavy curtains and rooms that stayed shut. Rooms Renee dusted once a month, though she never saw anyone use them. He paid her in cash, always the exact amount, always left on the kitchen counter under a coffee mug so it would not blow away. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was short. Good morning. Cold out. The upstairs bathroom is fine. Do not bother with it. For the first year, Renee found him unsettling. The way he would appear in a doorway without a sound and stand there, watching her work, his slippered feet making no noise on the old floors, his coffee going cold in his hand. She thought he did not trust her. She was used to that. Some clients followed her from room to room with their eyes, counting their own silver, asking her twice where a missing earring had gone when they had left it in the car. So she kept her head down and did her work well, because her work was the one thing nobody could take from her, and she had decided long ago that she would never give anyone a true reason to doubt. She wiped the baseboards even when no one would check them. She washed the inside of the windows. She got down on the bad knees and pulled the dust from under the radiators, where no eye would ever look, because the doing it right was for her, not for them. She found things into the cushions of his couch over the years. It's 20 here, a 10 there, once a 50 folded into a tight square, and every time she set the money on the counter beside his mug and never said a word. She did not know he was testing her. She only knew that the money was not hers, so she did not keep it. That was the whole of her thinking. It was not complicated to her, though it would turn out to be the most important thing she ever did. The strange part was how, over the years, the house began to change around her. Small things. A chair moved closer to the window where the morning light was good, the same window she always cleaned first. A second coffee mug appearing in the cabinet, then staying out on the counter, washed and dry, as though it were waiting for someone. Walter, who never spoke, beginning to leave the kitchen radio on low when she arrived. Tuned to the old gospel station her own grandmother used to play on Sunday afternoons in a kitchen 40 years gone. She noticed these things the way you notice weather, without deciding they meant anything. One Tuesday in the third year, she came in coughing. A bad cold. She could not afford to stop working through, the kind that sits in the chest and rattles, and she worked the whole house anyway. 'Cause a missed day was a missed $40, and $40 was the electric bill. The next visit there was a box of throat lozenges on the counter beside her pay, the cheap kind from the dollar store, unopened, the cellophane still crisp. No note, no word from the man who must have walked to a store on his old legs to buy them. She stood there a long moment with the little box in her hand, turning it over, picturing the old man at a checkout counter counting out coins for a stranger's cough. She never thanked him for it because she did not know how to, without making them both uncomfortable, and she sensed somehow that thanks would have embarrassed him more than silence, would have turned a small grace into a debt. So she said nothing, the way he said nothing, and somehow the saying nothing was its own kind of understanding between them. She just took the lozenges and the money and went home, and she gave the children supper, and heard their spelling words and tucked them in, and then that night, after the children were down, and the apartment had gone still, and the radiator had started its knocking, she sat in the dark kitchen with the little box on the table in front of her, and she cried a little, quietly, into a dish towel so she would not wake them, though she could not have said exactly why. It was not sadness. It was closer to the feeling of being seen after a long time of being looked through. What she did not know was that Walter had been watching her for 3 years not because he distrusted her, but because he was deciding something, and he was a slow and careful man who had been wrong about people before, and did not intend to be wrong again in what little time he had left. Her oldest was named Jalen, 16, quiet like his mother, with a gift for fixing things and no money for the tools to do it. He had taught himself off library videos and a borrowed screwdriver, and the neighbours brought him their broken lamps and their dead radios, and he fixed them for nothing because he liked the puzzle of it, and because his mother had raised him to. Her middle was Tasha, 11, who read everything she could get her hands on, cereal boxes and bus schedules and library books 3 at a time, and asked questions Renee did not always know how to answer, questions about why the world was built the way it was. The baby was Micah, 6, the one with the fever now, the one who still climbed into her bed when the radiator knocked too loud and the streetlight threw shapes on the wall that he was sure were watching him. Renee worked for those 3 faces, and on the nights when the arithmetic kit would not come out right, she would stand in the door of the room they shared and watch them sleep, 3 heads on 2 pillows, and remind herself why her back hurt. She had given up things she did not talk about, not to the children, not to anyone. Her own mother's wedding ring, sold 2 years back to a man behind glass for $110, when Micah needed an inhaler the insurance would not cover. And she had walked out of that pawn shop with the cash in her fist and the bare place on her finger, and she had not let herself look back through the window. The community college class she had started and stopped 3 times because there was never enough time or money to finish it. The textbooks still on her shelf with the bookmark at chapter 4 where life had interrupted her again. A pair of good shoes, just once, soft leather ones that did not pinch, that she had held in the store and put back on the shelf, because the children needed winter coats more than she needed to not limp at the end of a shift. None of this made her bitter. That was the thing about Renee that people missed when they looked at her, and saw only a tired woman in a cleaning uniform with a bucket in her hand. The hardship had not hardened her. She gave what she had. When the woman 2 doors down lost her job at the plant, Renee brought over a pot of greens and rice without being asked, and set it on the stove, and left before there could be thanks. When the boy at the bus stop had no gloves in January, her son came home without his, And when she asked Jalen where they were, he only shrugged. And she understood, and she did not scold him. The family ran on a kind of arithmetic the notebook could not track, a giving that did not subtract, and somehow they always had just barely enough, the way a well that is used every day somehow never runs entirely dry. I want you to hold all of that in your mind, the years of it, the lozenges and the gloves and the ring behind the glass, because the world was about to hold it too. The change in Walter came in the last year, though Renee only understood it looking back, the way you understand a season only once it has turned. He started talking to her, not much. He would be in the kitchen now when she arrived, sitting at the table with his coffee and the gospel radio low, and he would ask her things. How are the children? Is the oldest still fixing things? Did the little one get over that cough? She answered the way you answer a client, polite and brief, wary of the line between friendly and forward, and he kept asking anyway, gently, week after week. And slowly she began to answer for real. She told him about Jalen's hands, how the boy could take apart a broken toaster and have it humming again by supper, how he wanted to be the kind of man who built things. She told him about Tasha and her books, about how the girl had read the whole front section of the library and started on the back. She told him, once, on a bad day when she could not keep it in, about the rent going up again, and the math not working, and her mother in the nursing home down in Georgia, that she could not afford the gas to visit how. She had not seen her mother's face in person in 2 years, and only heard her voice on a phone, passed around by a nurse. Walter listened. He did not offer advice or money or the things people offer when they want a hard story to stop. He did not look away the way most people looked away when poverty was named out loud in a nice, clean kitchen. He just listened, his old hands around the cup, the radio humming, and he listened the way almost no one had ever listened to her. Like her ordinary life was worth the hearing, like she was a person and not a service. One Friday near the end, he said a strange thing. He set his cup down and looked at her for a long moment and said, "You remind me of someone I should have been kinder to, a long time ago." She did not know what to make of it. She said something small, something about being sorry to hear it, and went back to her work, and he did not explain, and the radio played on. That was the closest he ever came to telling her, and she missed it. Because how could she have known, how could anyone have known, that an old man was settling an account with his whole long life? The last Tuesday she ever cleaned that house, everything was already half gone. Boxes in the hall, taped and labelled in a stranger's marker. The pictures down off the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the dark paint where the light of 50 years had not reached. The heavy curtains were down too, and for the first time the rooms were full of a grey afternoon light that made the empty house look smaller and older and somehow sadder than it ever had with its secrets kept. Walter sat at the kitchen table in a coat, though the house was warm, his hands folded on the wood, and he watched her work one final time, and she felt his eyes on her the way she had that very first year, except now there was nothing unsettling in it at all. When she finished, the counters wiped and the floor done, and the last of the dust carried out, he stood, slow and careful, and he shook her hand, which he had never done in 6 years, and his grip was light as paper and cool as the morning. He said, "Thank you, Renee," and the way he said her name, full and plain, made her look up. Then he said, "I left you something on the counter. Do not open it here." She thought he meant her pay, a little extra perhaps, a goodbye envelope, the kind of thing a decent client sometimes left. She took the folded receipt, without looking at it, slipped it into her coat pocket, and said she hoped he would be well wherever he was going. He smiled at that, a small, tired smile that pulled at the lines of his whole face, and said, "I've already been better than I deserved, because of you." She did not understand. She drove home through the cold with the radio off, thinking about Micah's fever and the rent, and whether the heat in the car would hold out another winter. And the note sat in her pocket forgotten before she had reached the second light. It stayed forgotten for 11 days. Life did what life did to her. Micah's fever broke and then came back worse, and there was a night in a crowded clinic waiting room, and a copay she put on a card she should not have used. The car needed a sensor, $90 she did not have, and Jalen found a used one in a junkyard for $30, and put it in himself in the cold lot behind the building with his bare red hands. The rent came due, and she paid it 3 days late and ate the $40 fee like she ate so many things, without complaint, because complaint changed nothing. The coat went into the wash one of those nights, the note still buttoned in the pocket, and it survived only because she had buttoned that pocket out of long habit, and it came out of the dryer stiff and dried and curled. When she finally found it, working through her coat for bus money, she almost threw it out, thinking it was an old receipt, her thumb already moving to crumple it. Then she saw her name on the outside, in his shaky hand, the ink faded but holding. She unfolded it at her kitchen table after the children were asleep, under the one good light over the sink, and she read the 4 lines. And then she read them again, because the first reading had made no sense. And then she sat very still for a long time while the radiator knocked, and her own heart knocked louder against her ribs. The note said that the house on Linden Court and everything in it now belonged to her. It said the deed and the papers were already drawn up and waiting with a lawyer downtown, whose name and address followed in the same shaky hand. It said she had been the only person in 20 years to treat him as though he were worth more than what he could give her, and that she had passed a test she never knew she was taking. It said, in the last line, "Do not be afraid. You have already earned it. You earned it every day you did not know I was watching." Renee did not sleep that night. She sat at the table and held the receipt in both hands, as though it might dissolve into the air she was barely breathing. And she did not let herself believe it because she had learned a long time ago not to believe in rescue. People like her did not get notes like this. There was a catch. There was always a catch. The house was probably mortgaged to the rafters, or the man's mind had gone at the end, and the family would descend and laugh her off the porch. Or it was some confusion that would dissolve the moment a person in a suit looked at it. She decided she would go to the lawyer, and the lawyer would explain the mistake, and she would lose nothing, because she had hoped for nothing, and that was how she protected herself, by refusing the hope before the world could take it from her again. Still, she could not quite throw the note away. She read it a 4th time. Then she folded it along its old crease and put it back in the buttoned pocket, and in the morning she made the children breakfast as though the ground beneath her had not just moved. The lawyer's office was on the 11th floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place where the lobby alone was bigger than her whole apartment, and the floors were marble so polished she could see the grey ceiling in. Them marble that her own knees had scrubbed in 100 other buildings just like it for women who never once learned her name. She wore her good blouse, the one she saved for parent meetings, ironed twice the night before. She rode the elevator up with her stomach in her shoes, and she sat in the waiting room with her hands folded and her back straight, and she practiced in her mind the calm face she would wear when they told her it was a mistake, so that she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing it land. A young woman in a sharp blazer led her back down a hall of glass. The lawyer was a man named Pratt, grey-suited and careful, with reading glasses and a manner so quiet it was almost gentle. And he had a thick folder on his desk with her name on the tab in printed letters, Carter Renee. He asked her to confirm who she was. He asked how she had known. Walter, and she told him. Plainly, 6 years, Tuesdays and Fridays, I cleaned his house. And then he opened the folder and began, in the flat, patient voice of a man who has delivered strange news before, and learned to do it slowly, to explain what she had inherited, and the world Renee had built out of careful arithmetic came apart at the seams. Walter, the lawyer said, had not been simply an old man in a too-big house. Walter had been the founder of a company, one she would know the name of, a company he built from nothing 60 years ago in a rented garage and grew into something with his name over the door and sold for a fortune 2 decades back. He had retired to that dark house on Linden Court and given almost everything away quietly, never a building named for him, never a photograph in the paper, given it to causes and clinics and strangers over 20 years, because he had outlived his wife and his only son and had no family left, and had decided somewhere in his grief that the giving was the only thing that had ever made him feel clean. The house was the last thing he owned outright. The house and one account he had set aside years before for a particular purpose. A purpose he would not name to anyone, not even to Pratt, until the very end. Renee's name was on both. The lawyer slid a single sheet across the desk, turned to face her, and asked her quietly to look at the figure printed at the bottom. She looked. She did not understand the number at first, because it had too many digits to be a number that had anything to do with her, and she counted them once and lost the count and counted them again, and when she finally understood it, she put her hand over her mouth and made no sound at all. It was $400,000, and the house, Mr. Pratt added gently, removing his glasses. The house was appraised at roughly $300 more. She had walked into that office a woman who could be ruined by a $90 censor. She would walk out a woman who would never again do the quiet arithmetic at midnight for the rest of her life. Renee did not weep in the lawyer's office. She held it, the way she had held everything else her whole life, with her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes shining hard and her back straight in the chair, while Mr. Pratt walked her through the papers and the timeline and the small practical truths of a life turned all the way over. There was one thing she had to know, though, one thing larger than the number, and when he finished, she asked it, her voice low and even and steady in a way that surprised even her. She asked why. She asked what test, what watching, what had she done that an old man would do this? And the lawyer paused and set down his pen. And then he told her the rest, the part that was not in the 4 lines on the receipt. He told her that Walter had been robbed, years before Renee ever came to that house, by a cleaner who had taken cash and small valuables for the better part of a year, a little at a time, betting the old man would not notice. And the old man had noticed and had said nothing and had simply let her go, and had been wounded by it more deeply than the money could account for, because it had confirmed something bitter he was afraid to believe about people. He told her that Walter, after that, had begun leaving money out on purpose, in cushions and drawers and on counters, not to tempt anyone into ruin but to see them clearly, because he had decided in his loneliness that how a person behaved when they was watchings was the only true measure of who they were. Dozens of people had worked in that house over those years, the lawyer said, cleaners and yardmen and nurses near the end. Some took a little, some took a lot. Renee was the only one in all of it who had returned every dollar every single time for almost 6 years, without ever once mentioning it, without ever once expecting or asking for a word of thanks. The lozenges, the chair moved into the good light, the gospel radio, the careful questions about her children, all of it had been an old man slowly coming to understand that the answer he had been searching the world for, the proof he had nearly given up on, had been quietly washing his windows the whole time. Renee thought of the $50 folded into a tight square that she had set beside his mug, without a second thought 3 years back, on a week when $50 would have meant Micah's medicine and a full tank both, and she understood at last that it had never been about the 50. It had been about her. She drove home and sat in the parking lot of her own building for an hour before she could make her legs carry her up, watching the windows of her apartment go gold as Tasha turned on the lights inside. Then she went up the 2 flights, and she stood in the door of the children's room and watched them sleep, the way she always had. 3 heads on 2 pillows, and this time everything was different and nothing was, because they were still the reason. They had always been the reason, and now the reason was safe. She did not tell them right away. She was half afraid that saying it out loud would break the spell of it, that the words would let the air in, and the whole impossible thing would collapse. She went to work the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and she finished out every one of her clients properly, scrubbing floors she now owned the means to never scrub again, and she gave each family 2 weeks' notice, the way a person ought to, because she would not vanish on the people who depended on her the way Walter had vanished from her, even though his vanishing had turned out to be a gift wrapped in grief. There was a moment near the end of those last weeks that she would remember for the rest of her life. Tasha, the reader, the question-asker, found the receipt in her mother's coat pocket while hunting for bus money one morning, and she stood at the counter and read the 4 faded lines. And she came to Renee with a paper held in both hands and her young face full of a question far too big for an 11-year-old to hold. She did not ask if it was real. She did not ask if they were rich now. She looked up at her mother and asked, "Mama, did he know us?" And Renee, who had spent her whole life refusing the easy hope, who had put her mother's ring behind glass and walked away without looking back, pulled her daughter against her and pressed her face into the girl's hair and said the truest thing she knew. She said, "He knew us better than we knew. He was watching the whole time, baby, and he saw that we were good when nobody was making us be, and it turned out that was worth everything." They moved into the house on Linden Court in the spring. Renee had the dark wood walls painted a warm cream, the colour of the inside of a shell, and she took down the last of the heavy curtains, let the light pour into the shut rooms that had stayed dark for a generation, and the house that had felt like a held breath for as long as she had known it began, slowly, room by room, to feel like a home. Jalen took the basement for a workshop, and with the first real set of tools he had ever owned, a wall of them, sockets and meters, and a proper bench under a good light, he started fixing neighbours' appliances and small engines for a little money and a lot of practice. Word got around, and on Saturdays there was a quiet line of broken things at the side door. A washing machine motor, a lawnmower that would not turn over, a child's bicycle, and the boy met each of them with the same patient pleasure he had brought to a borrowed screwdriver years before. Within a year he was talking about trade school, the same hungry way his sister talked about books, certificates and apprenticeships, and the kind of work that put your name on a truck, and Renee had the means now to send him, and she told him so on the back step one evening, and watched something he had been carrying set itself down. Tasha had a room of her own for the first time in her life, with a window seat that caught the afternoon sun, and a wall of shelves that Renee had a carpenter build floor to ceiling, and that the girl filled with library cast-offs and yard sale paperbacks, and a few new books with uncracked spines, before the leaves even turned. Micah, no longer feverish in a cold apartment with a knocking radiator, no longer startled awake by streetlight shapes on the wall, grew an inch over the summer and learned to ride the bicycle his brother had fixed and stopped climbing into his mother's bed at night, though there were times she lay awake in the warm, quiet house and quietly missed the small, stubborn weight of him against her side. Renee did 3 things with the money that mattered to her more than all the rest of it put together. She brought her mother up from the nursing home in Georgia, drove down herself in a reliable car to get her, and put her in the sunny front room with the good morning light, the very light Walter used to move his chair toward. And the 2 women sat together in the mornings with coffee while the gospel station played low, because Renee had kept the old radio and set it on the windowsill. She bought her mother a plain gold band to replace the one behind the pawn shop, glass, and slid it onto the old woman's finger, and neither of them could speak for a while. She finished the community college class she had started and stopped 3 times, opened the textbook to the bookmark at chapter 4, and this time she kept going, and the cap and gown were still a long way off but no longer impossible, no longer a thing she let herself want only in the dark, and she set aside a portion, a real and deliberate portion, not to spend but to give the way Walter had given quietly, no name on anything, to the family 2 doors down from the old place and the boy at the bus stop who had needed gloves and the woman who had lost her job at the plant, because she had learned from a silent old man at a kitchen table that the truest wealth was never what a person kept, but what they could see clearly. Enough to share. She never spent the 400,000 the way the people in her old building would have imagined, the way she might have imagined herself on the worst nights. She put most of it where it could not be swept away by a single bad season. Talk to a careful man Mr. Pratt recommended, and she lived simply still, out of long habit, and out of a deep respect for how the money had come to her. But the midnight arithmetic was over and would not come back. She slept now, full nights, all the way through. People in the neighbourhood heard pieces of the story over the years and got most of it wrong in the retelling, made it about luck, about a crazy rich man, and something like a winning ticket, an old fool and a lucky maid. Renee never bothered to correct them. She knew the truth of it, and the truth was enough. She knew it had not been luck. Luck does not watch a woman for 6 years. Luck does not walk to a dollar store on old legs to buy a coughing stranger a box of lozenges. What had found her was not chance but something older and steadier, and more patient than chance. The slow, careful recognition of a single watching man who had spent 20 lonely years giving away a fortune in search of one person who would have returned the $50 whether or not another living soul ever knew she had. She had been that person long before she had any reason to be, on 100 ordinary Tuesdays when no one was keeping score. That was the whole point of it. That was the only point. If a stranger had been watching your quietest, most ordinary days, the ones where nobody thanked you and nobody was keeping count, what would they have seen? Sit with that tonight, because I think more of you are being watched, by someone, somewhere, than you will ever know. Renee kept the receipt. She had it framed in plain wood, the cheap curled paper and the shaky handwriting and the 4 lines that had survived the wash and the dryer and 11 forgotten days, and she hung it in the front room where her mother sat in the morning light with the radio playing. People who visited the Warm Cream House sometimes noticed it and asked what it was. A faded grocery receipt behind glass on the wall of so fine a home, and Renee would only smile and say it was the most important thing anyone had ever given her, and leave it at that. On the worst day of her old life, she could have been ruined by a $90 part. On the best day of her new one, she sat in the good light beside her mother, with her 3 children safe and growing in their own rooms above her. And she lifted the framed note down off the wall just to hold it the way she had held it that first stunned night at her kitchen table. And she read the last line again the way she did sometimes. It's when the house had gone quiet, and the gratitude rose up in her too large to keep inside. Do not be afraid. You have already earned it. And she was not afraid, not anymore, not ever again, and she had earned it. Every day she did not know he was watching, and she knew that now, all the way down to the bone. If this story warmed something in you tonight, tell me about the person in your life who did the quiet good thing when nobody was watching, because somebody ought to say their name out loud. And if you would like another story about a kindness that waited long years to be repaid, there is one more waiting for you right now.